Hello and welcome to the Alpha Edge Podcast, the show for men over 50 who refuse to fade out, slow down, play small, or settle for average. I'm your host, Kevin English. I'm a healthy aging expert, coach, and founder of the Alpha Edge, and I am here to help you get and stay strong in every dimension of your life, physically, mentally, emotionally, morally, and spiritually. You're here because you're ready to reclaim your power, to own your masculinity, and lead your life with strength and purpose. If you're ready to sharpen your edge, revive your drive, and lead like a man who's built for more, you're in the right place. All right, men, let's get after it. All right, guys, I am so pumped to share this episode with you guys. Today's episode is an absolute barn burner of a conversation. Today, I'm joined by Jay Campbell. Jay is a 5-time international best-selling author. He's a men's physique champion, so the dude is over 50 and ripped. And he's one of the world's leading, probably is the world's leading authority on hormone optimization, peptides, and biohacking. And this guy's on an absolute mission to blow up the modern sick care system and to help men take back control of their biology, their mindset, and their longevity. So in this conversation, we dig deep into the truth about testosterone, the power of peptides, and why raising your consciousness might just be the ultimate biohack. So if you guys are ready to cut through the noise, learn how to optimize your hormones, and build a body that's as strong as your purpose, this one is for you. Now, just a quick note for those of you who also listen to my other podcast, the Over 50 Health and Wellness Show, just note that this is going to be a repeat. So this exact same episode is going to show up over there as well. So Jay originally reached out to me to collaborate on a podcast for the Over 50 Health and Wellness Show. Obviously, gladly agreed to that. And at the minute I finished that conversation, I knew that I was going to have to repurpose that show for this audience as well. So without further ado, let's meet Jay.
Yeah, man. So 100,000 foot summary is I was an athlete. I played baseball, soccer, and basketball in college. In high school, played basketball in college. Was really good. Played at small school, NAIA in Division II, but ended up playing professionally for one season over in Austria. And at my 29th year, almost 30, I was a month away from turning 30. I was still playing in adult men's basketball leagues in Southern California. I got kicked in the testicles in a game, checked out, and 6, 7, 8 weeks later, this is back in 1999, so a long time ago now because I'm 54, I started feeling run down. And I was at the time working for the Los Angeles Times as an advertising salesperson, and I went to my PPO doctor. And as I like to think, Kevin, in life, there are no coincidences, only synchronicities. He recommended me to an endocrinologist, and the endocrinologist actually happened to be a Harvard-educated guy by the name of Dr. Raymond Scruggs. And he measured my labs and he said, hey, you have the testosterone levels of a 80-year-old geriatric. And he's like, I can bring you back with a course of therapeutic testosterone, and you'll be feeling like you were when you were in your early 20s again in 6 to 8 weeks. But go home and talk to your, at the time, she was my wife-to-be, my fiance. Shout out to Kelly. She's long gone now. She was my first wife. But, to get her confirmation. And so we did. And just as he said, 6, 7, 8 weeks later, I started feeling amazing. I went back to see him and he wanted to take me off of it. And I was like, dude, you're not taking me off this. Like, this is life transforming for me. Yeah. I feel totally different. So at that point, I was now 30 years old. And I was injecting therapeutic testosterone. And honestly, Kevin, from that point forward, even till now, so 24 years later, I've just been this very astute, studious biohacker. I was using different delivery systems of therapeutic testosterone. And at the same time that I was doing that, I was also researching peptides. Like, I tell people this and they're kind of incredulous and disbelief, but I've been using peptides since 2004, right? So most people didn't even know peptides. I mean, most of the clinical community didn't even know what a peptide was until 2017, 2018. So I'd already been using these things for more than close to 15 years or right around there when these guys started using them. So again, I've been using them a long time. And truthfully, I wrote my first book on therapeutic testosterone in 2014. It was not published until 2015. And then from there, I've written 6 other books. 5 of them have been international bestsellers. 1 of them was on peptides, many of them on fasting and autophagy. And I've just been blessed, to lecture and to speak around the world about all of these things. And I think, for my bio, the one thing that stands out is that when I published the peptide book, it was also against my better judgment. My inner circle was like, dude, you got to write a book on peptides. But at the time, to me, it was still such a gray market thing. It still is. Right. I mean, we can talk about this on this podcast, but It published on January 31st of 2023, and it was right in the peak of the vaccine, whatever you want to call it, scandal, controversy, the scamdemic. And so many people are looking for alternative forms of healing that the book just exploded into mainstream consciousness. And it was really the first peptide book on Amazon that was written for the layperson to understand. And so I would say in the last like 2.5 years since that book was published, my name has exploded into the, I won't call it mainstream because it's still niche, but into the biohacking consciousness. And so now I'm asked to speak all over the world. I just spoke on London in a major stage for the Health Optimization Summit on peptides. The room was completely sold out. So I'm just in a room or in a world right now where so many people are interested in peptides. And I just happen to be a guy who's been using them for close to 23 years. And so it's just like I'm in the right place at the right time.
Right on. You are at the right place in the right time. And that time and place is right here, right now. Because like I said before we hit record, man, I've been looking for an expert to just deep dive on peptides here. So you're the guy. I absolutely love it. That's quite the history, right? I think most of my listeners here, I'm going to go out on a limb, have only recently heard of peptides, probably because of the Ozempic, Wegovy, the GLP ones, right? Exactly. Yeah. But let's back up here. Let's lay a little groundwork. What are peptides?
Yeah, so peptides are what I call fractionated proteins, aka signaling molecules that are naturally, organically found in the body. Like, for example, BPC 157 is a peptide that most people are familiar with, in that it's body protective compound, and it literally is found in the gastric system and gastric juices, and it literally speeds the rate of healing because it increases what is known as angiogenesis, which is basically the increase in red blood cell tissue and formation to the areas that are wounded or injured or systemically, broken from, say, torn ligaments or sprained elbow tendons or something like that. So if you inject BPC 157, or you could actually, there's even transdermal solutions of it, or even strips that you can place on your tongue, it speeds the rate of healing. But basically, mostly almost all peptides are like that. They are organic and they are naturally found in the human body. And the longer the chain of them as amino acid sequences, the more likely that it has to be injected to be an impact delivery system. And then the shorter the chain, for example, like bioregulators, many people now are familiar with Russian bioregulators. They can be taken as oral capsules. Those are very small chained. And the smaller the chain, the more likely you can consume them as oral, and the more likely they'll be effective even in the digestive tract.
Gotcha. So these are a group of organic compounds. I guess we could think of these as chains of amino acid. Is that fair?
Exactly. That's exactly what they are. They're chains of amino acids.
Chains of amino acids. And it might be helpful then for us to sort of categorize these. We've already mentioned, weight loss. You've mentioned kind of healing with the BPC 157. What are people using peptides for today most commonly?
Yeah, so it's a great question. There's way more available and known to science than what we use. And right now there's about 27, I should probably say 40, but 27 that are well known, that are used and prescribed in the clinical community. And I won't name them all, but you can look at them from an impact standpoint of like healing, cognition, fat loss and anti-aging, longevity. There's the brain. I already said cognitive, but there's, nootropic forms. And then there's obviously stuff that really helps with immunity, right? So you've got a bunch of different classifications, about 5 or 6, and then obviously some of them, function 2 and 3 ways and a lot of different ways. But there's essentially 27 that the clinical community is aware of and prescribes, off-label, of course, because the FDA has classified them as what there's known as class 2, which means that what it really means, Kevin, is they can't patent them and make money off of them. So they have to try to make them obscure and restrict pharmacies and compound pharmacies from manufacturing them, even though thankfully there's good ones out there that still do it because they're like, hey, these things are life-saving and helping people. But that's I think that's the best way to classify them. There's really like between 5 and 7 categories, and then there's multiple peptides that fill in each category.
Right. Okay. So let's deep dive a little bit into the politics of this and the money of this, the finances of this. So we have these organic compounds. You've already referenced this, but Big Pharma's not that excited about these because it's just an organic compound. They can't really, I guess you could maybe try and change some, a single molecule and then patent that very quickly and then sell it,
Sure.
right? But so there's this pushback and it's this kind of gray area. So if I were interested, and let's just use the BPC 157, for example, can I go to my local compounding pharmacy and say, hey, whip me up some? Or does that depend what state I live in? How does that work?
It's another great question. So there's two ways in society in the West, I'd say, because they're not even this far in the like Europe or in the EU or in Asia, but there's two ways to get peptides. One is through the way you just said, which is you go to your functional health doctor or physician or your functional wellness person, whoever they are. They might be a nurse practitioner or a physician's assistant who have licenses to prescribe. And they can write you a script for, any of those, call them 27 peptides off label that can then be procured by a compound pharmacy. And you can use them again, according to the script of the doctor. The other way, and this is the way that I represent and the way that I teach people how to use them, is that you can purchase peptides, what are known as for research purposes. And these are basically research chemical companies, one of which is what I own, which is BioLongevity Labs. And we are not under the purview of the FDA. We are in this obscure gray area known as research. And technically, we sell products that are for research purposes only. Now, what that really means, again, it's a gray area, is that pretty much anyone can use a research peptide by saying, I'm researching with this peptide, or I'm using this on my laboratory animal or my pet. And again, a lot of people use research peptides on their dogs. They're basically domesticated animals, horses, pigs. I mean, again, if you have something like a cat or a dog in your house and it's getting old, a lot of people are using peptides to regenerate their health and rejuvenate them and restore them and heal them and stuff like that. But legally, you are allowed to do that. The difference is, there really isn't much of a difference from a manufacturing standpoint, as long as you, as the independent consumer / end user, is choosing, companies, whether they're research or compound pharmacies, that are using what we call GMP manufacturing processes, which really stands for good manufacturing processes. A GMP facility also offers what are known as certificates of authenticity, which are called COAs, which again verify and substantiate that the product that you're buying is, X of 100% label claim. So again, if you're buying BPC 157, you will get a certificate of authenticity, hopefully that says it's 99.9% or 99.8% pure, which is again statistically 100%. And again, the company that you're buying it from, can verify that they are a legitimate lab and that they are doing independent verified testing and they're offering this. And again, if you're buying from a compound pharmacy, you assume that they're doing that because obviously they're under the FDA's purview. Whereas in the research world, you have to be kind of a buyer beware because there are a lot of companies now in this new, peptide wild west space where some of these companies, I would say, I won't call them bogus, but I don't trust what they're doing from a manufacturing standpoint. So it's really just buyer beware. If you're going to buy from a research chemical company, buy from a BioLongevity Labs, buy from a Peptide Sciences, buy from a company that's been established, in the marketplace and does a very high volume of sales and business, because you don't want to buy from one of those fly-by-night companies that may not be, doing everything above board and might be cutting corners when they manufacture.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Before you inject anything into your body, you probably want to be very, very certain of the quality, the source. So I can appreciate that. It sounds a lot like I'm here in North Carolina, and when I buy my raw milk, it is labeled not for human consumption, right?
Exactly.
So it's kind of nudge, nudge, wink, wink. Yeah, I'm not going to, right?
It's a complete joke. And, very truthfully, I'm glad you brought that up, because in my 23 or 22 and a half years, technically, of using therapeutic peptides, I have never seen a person OD from injecting a compounded version or a research version. And what I'm saying, and why I'm saying this to your audience, is that you shouldn't be afraid. These are organic signaling molecules found in the human body naturally. It's nearly impossible to overdose. Now, obviously, you've heard stories, and we'll talk about GLPs in a second, because obviously there's a path to go down with that, because I really want the audience to understand the difference between using GLPs effectively and using GLPs the way the pharmaceutical world wants you to do it, which is completely wrong. But those peptides, if you take too high of a dose, there can definitely be issues. Again, you're not going to die, right? Like you can definitely overdose on allopathic slash Rockefeller petroleum distillate, pills that break down in the body and cause all sorts of symptoms and side effects. But on a peptide, it's very unlikely. You might have, nausea. You might have slowed gastric motility if you overdose a GLP-1 peptide, and you might have some gallbladder issues or some things like that because you're not eating effectively or your appetite is so suppressed you're not getting any carbohydrates and roughage and bowel movements and et cetera, et cetera. But you still are not going to die. So I really want people to be aware that these compounds slash products are so safe that even if a consumer has no idea what they're doing, which by the way happens a lot because you do have to have a little bit of brain power to use a peptide because you have to understand what a milligram versus a microgram is, and you have to understand how to reconstitute and all these little things that come along with it. So people do screw themselves up with them. But again, I've never seen anyone die. I've never seen anyone say, oh my God, this person had to go to the hospital because they overdosed on peptides. You see what I'm saying?
Okay, so yeah, interesting. You have that from a safety perspective. Now, who is a good candidate for peptide therapy? Who's
Great question.
Yeah, who's kind of the avatar of somebody who is a good candidate to start exploring
So
this?
this is a really good question, and I can go a lot of ways with this. So I say when I lecture and when I talk, you should not even consider using peptides unless you are living what I call a dialed in lifestyle. And let's just say a dialed in lifestyle is you're already exercising. Hopefully you're doing a combination of resistance training and cardiovascular training. You live relatively insulin controlled, which means you're regulating your consumption of sugar and really high fructose or call it boxed GMO foodstuffs. And you're sleeping hopefully 6 to 7 to 8 hours a night. The other thing, and I want to say this because it's very important, is you should also understand whether or not you're working with a hormone deficiency or not. As you know, probably in the West today, 70 to 75% of people over the age of 50 are walking around with a hormone deficiency that is undiagnosed because their doctors don't understand hormone deficiency because they're not talked about it. They don't train about it in medical school. And there isn't a lot of money to be made in prescribing people hormones because, again, it's relatively cheap. And by giving people hormones, you pretty much immunize them from getting sick and ill as they get older, and there's no money in the pharma allopathic sick care system for people that are healthy. So you're not going to find a lot of doctors that are going to write scripts for hormones. Granted, they are out there, and there's a lot of good ones. And thank God for people like us and for you and for people that follow you in this podcast that ability is out there. But I like to tell people that, in fact, it's one of my 10 commandments. Like if you're going to start with a GLP peptide, and we can talk about GLPs right now, and obviously GLP peptides are the appetite suppression, metabolism enhancing. Now we're into the phase 3 and phase 4 where they increase IGF, they increase nutrient partitioning and insulin signaling, and they do all these amazing things. But if you are not hormonally balanced / optimized and you jump on one of those things, meaning a GLP, it can be really catastrophic because they are very effective in increasing metabolic rate and suppressing appetite. And if you are not a trained person, and I mean like conditioned to eat enough protein, to lift weights, to do cardio, and you start taking one of those and you're holding on to 20, 30, 40 pounds too much and you stop eating, you're going to be like, wow, this is working. Because the weight's going to drop off initially. But as you know, Kevin, there's metabolic hell to pay and haywire to come because you're going to damage your metabolic rate. You're going to damage your thyroid hormone production. And eventually you're going to have to come off of it. And once you come off of it, you again experience what I call metabolic haywire, thyroid damage. And now you've gained beyond what you were when you first started. So this doesn't happen though to people who are hormonally optimized already, or at least on the path to doing it and doing all the other things right. In fact, I will say this, and I continue to say this, and I just said this in London in front of a couple thousand people. GLP peptides are the greatest invention or / intervention in the history of medicine. When they're done correctly, there's nothing like them. They will drop fat off of human bodies and suppress inflammation and change brainwave patterning better than anything else we've ever seen. And again, how that happens is by dosing them appropriately and dosing them correctly. And dosing them appropriately is using microdoses. And unfortunately, pharma teaches people to start high and go higher because in their obviously business model, that's what they want, right? They want the patient starting at a high bolus dose, Next week, titrating higher,
Right.
the week after higher, the week after higher, onward it goes until eventually the person has completely blown their receptor sensitivity to the peptide. So now the peptide has stopped working. On top of that, they're taking, astronomical milligram amounts of the drug or of the peptide. And Kevin, they're running out of money because they've jacked up the price as they stair step the dose. So you never want to do that. In my world, in the way I lecture and teach people how to use GLPs, you want to start low and go slow. And you want to assess your tolerance to the peptide. And again, by taking a microdose, because remember, these are very powerful signaling molecules, your body is going to tell you within a week of how you respond individually to that peptide. And if you're taking a very small, minute, call it surgically precise dose, you're never going to blow your receptors. Your receptors are always going to be sensitive to it. And so you're always going to get a very decent, if not great effect, but never to a point where it's like, oh my God, I got to take way more. Like I see these people and they come to me all the time, in my private membership groups and in messages and stuff like that and say, I'm taking 15 milligrams a week of a peptide. And it's like, dude,
Yeah.
you're taking 15 times too much. Like you have destroyed your receptor sensitivity. So the truth is that GLP peptides, when done correctly, and let's define done correctly, eating enough protein, right? So it's not 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight, especially if you're obese. It's your goal body weight
Right on.
times 1.
Yep.
Right. So if you're a 300-pound man and you should be 200 pounds, you should be eating somewhere between 175 and 200 grams of protein, not 300 grams of protein. You should also be lifting weights. You have to build muscle or maintain muscle when you take these drugs because they're so good at increasing metabolism and shutting down appetite. So you can't afford to lose muscle and damage your thyroid. And then again, this is always has to be listed. You got to be doing cardio as you get older, as you know, to improve the heart, to strengthen the vascular network. And then you also have to be sleeping at least 6 or 7 hours a night. So those are your kind of non-negotiables. And then I would say that even again, primarily and first and foremost is, do you know if you have a hormone deficiency? And if you do have a hormone deficiency, are you doing something about it? And doing something about it, we can talk about this, is, either naturally attempting to optimize. And if you live in a big city, good luck, because you're under siege from blue light, from plastics, from, endocrine disrupting chemicals, phthalates, BPA, atrazine, glyphosate, they're everywhere.
Yeah.
If you live in the Midwest, good luck. You need what I think is the biggest tool in the tool belt all the time, and that's usually going to be some therapeutic testosterone. If you're a woman, you probably need some therapeutic estradiol and some progesterone too. So again, that's how we optimize our hormones as we're aging, is to, just get on hormone optimization protocols. But again, it's really crucial if you are using a GLP peptide, because you cannot, under any circumstances, as a 45 to 55 to 65-year-old aging man or woman, to lose muscle, because that will damage and destroy your metabolism, and you will start off, or actually you'll end up worse than when you started off.
Right on, brother. Yeah, we preach that all the time here. When I hear people come in and their goal, and say they're in their 50s and 60s, is to lose weight, I'm like, stop right there. That's the worst thing you could do, is just lose weight. You want to build muscle, burn fat. Let's go, right? All right.
100%.
So, man, a whole bunch of questions come into mind here. It seems to me that pharma's got the exact opposite message of what you just said. They're basically saying, hey, overweight, obese person, here's, take this injection once a week, go. And that's your prescription. You're saying, hey, until you've built strength, until you've restored your metabolism, until you've, got your hormones optimized, I want to come back to that in a second. This really isn't appropriate for you. And that is a very counter message to, I think, what is being publicly talked about these. You and Big Pharma are both saying, hey, this is a miracle. And I do believe this is a seismic shift in pharmacology here, just peptides in general, certainly
Yes.
GLP-1. So it's very interesting to hear you talk about it that way. So let's kind of really narrow in on this ideal avatar for specifically on GLP-1s, because I think we probably have a lot of people's interest here. So for example, if I am somebody who is building some muscle, I've been working on restoring my metabolism, which means I'm probably eating maybe in a slight calorie surplus. I've been very focused on building some, I'm not turning into She-Ra or the Hulk, but I'm working on that. And now I'm ready for a strategic fat loss phase. Would this be the time I would cycle in some GLP-1 microdosing? or would I just do that throughout?
100%.
Or
100% you would.
okay.
No, it's a great question. 100% you would. So a microdose of a GLP-2 like tirzepatide, which is also known as Mounjaro and Zepbound that people know from the pharmacies. And then the best one, which isn't FDA approved yet, but of course the research chemical companies like myself have it, is GLP-3, which is known as retatrutide, which by the way is a Lilly pharmaceutical and will be available and FDA approved by sometime next summer. It may be earlier by like end of first quarter next year. I mean, but my guess is it's going to be by summer of next year. But this has been in the research community since 2023. So that's how far the research world is ahead of the pharma world. It's usually like 2 or 3 years in testing now. And as you know, we're in a biomedical revolution. So we have all these amazing products that are out there. You just have to either be A, following somebody that teaches you how to use them, or B, courageous and smart enough to go out and research and find on your own, because it's out there. But your question's a good question, because I highly recommend that all people in their 40s, 50s, and 60s who desire to live longest and strongest use a microdose of either GLP-2, which is again tirzepatide, or GLP-3 preferably, which is retatrutide, because it massively improves metabolic rate. It improves the brainwave patterning, so it eliminates food noise. Actually, Kevin, it's so amazing. There's many, many published studies now out there in the clinical literature that shows that it literally stops addictive behaviors. It stops alcoholism. It rewires dopaminergic pathways so that people are not like, jerking off to porn or playing video games all day. So, I mean, it does a lot of amazing stuff in the brain. And again, you don't need a lot. You just need a tiny bit. So that person, that man or woman who's working, to maintain or to lose, maybe 10, 15, 12, 15 pounds or something like that. These things are amazing tools for that specific need. And again, it's critically important that if you are using them at a microdose, that you are paying attention to your hormones, because you do not and cannot afford to lose muscle by using them in a microdose. And that's the thing about these things. They're so powerful and effective in what they do that even somebody who's doing everything else right, but uses one of these things in a clinically precise dose, who's not hormonally optimized, can lose muscle. So the key is, like, are we, doing everything in our power to keep our hormones balanced and optimized while we use these microdoses of GLPs?
All right. Fantastic. That dovetails very nicely into where I want to go next, because you've talked about being hormonally optimized several times. Now, the reference range for both male and female, well, for estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, I think is a joke. Let's take testosterone for males, for example. I believe in the US, it's 300 to 1,500.
780. It's now, dude, it's so insanely. Yeah. They're crushing the standard mean deviation. Right. So the top and the bottom are narrowing. Yeah. So now it's, if you can believe this, the last one is 196. Holy hell. Is that right?
Wow.
It's literally insane. Yeah. So basically almost everyone is being told
they're normal.
Men, men and women, we'll talk about both, but for now we'll talk about men. They're being told that they're fine, you're good, and they send these guys home and they're not. Because, and by the way, just so you understand this, and I think we're on the same wavelength. I think this is a scam too, but they'll tell you that the standard mean is collapsing at the top and the bottom because of obesity, and that the average person is fat. But I actually believe, and a lot of my doctors believe, that it's really just they're attempting to restrict testosterone scripts even more, because again, they don't want a healthy population. They want a sick population. It's not a conspiracy. I think it's pretty obvious. Look around at our society today.
Yeah, I'd be hard pressed to fight you on that. Clearly, I've said this before in this podcast, my audience, we are the cash cows, right? 50s, 60s, yep. 70s. Yep. Most of us are on at least one prescription medicine. A lot of us are on more than one, and we're on it for life. So that's a pretty good deal if you're Bayer or some big pharma. It's a pretty crappy deal if you're you and me, right? So we want to optimize our health. So when we look at these these reference ranges that are just moving south, that's not optimal health, right? So no. A guy could go and test at 200. That's what.
And they say you're fine.
And they say you're fine. In other words, you're not sick, which you're not.
You might feel like you're dying.
Yeah, And look, when it comes to, and let's just stick with males and testosterone, obviously we think of that as the sex hormone. It is, fair enough, but it's involved in so many other things. It's our drive, it's our mood, it's a lot of brain regulation, right? So there's a lot going on here. When You talk about being hormonally optimized. I suspect you don't mean say a guy being above 200 in his standard lab test there. Is that correct?
That's correct. When I talk about optimize, and I'll speak for male and females,
Sure.
and let's get into, because you brought it up and we need to talk about it. The standard reference ranges are literally meaningless for people who desire to live above the mean.
Right.
And what I mean by that is, and this is how broken our system is, even the people prescribing testosterone today, and again, obviously I'm talking about functional medicine doctors, endocrinologists, urologists for men, they are attempting, and again, this is insane, but they're attempting to keep their males, let's just talk about men for right now, within that standard mean deviation of say 198 to 780 of total testosterone. Now, this is where it's insane. Total testosterone is a completely meaningless number.
Yeah.
The only number that means anything is what is known as free testosterone, or what is called bioavailable testosterone, because that's the actual unbound testosterone in the body that a man, I shouldn't say masculine because there's not many masculine men left, but a man can actually access to, use as his, call it, master hormone, is, the master gland and master regulating hormone of the human body for men and women, which is testosterone. So you've got all these doctors looking at this total range, giving people therapeutic hormones in a lot of, very ineffective means like pellets and troches and lozenges and there's even worse things out there now. There's one that's called Enzo, and they have to take 3 capsules a day and take capsules a day, which by the way is very ineffective because most patients are not going to adhere to dosing something 3 times a day. It barely moves them like 100 points over 200. It's insane.
Yeah.
It's literally insane. But we can get into the delivery systems that matter. But basically, imagine being your doctor who doesn't really know what he's doing. He has no training from medical school. He just knows like the biological textbook definition of what testosterone and endocrine system functioning is and all this stuff in class 1 and class 2 hypogonadism. They don't understand the nuance and the niche-based, prescribing of hormones. And so they're trying to keep their patients in these narrow ranges. And as you and I already discussed, the narrow ranges are useless anyway because they're compressed. So you're not helping unless you're working with a physician, and this is my definition, a physician who's been prescribing hormones for 10 years or longer, because they have been around long enough to see the suppression of the ranges at the top end and the bottom. And so they understand where their patients feel the best, and feeling the best. And again, this is a weird arbitrary number because there's different test ranges, but in America, for the most part, you've got the 2 biggest labs are private MD labs, LabCorp and Quest. Yeah. Okay. And they're using pretty much the same data sets, and their data, it would be for free testosterone, it would have to be over 40. Now, I'm telling you this, Kevin, because I see labs every day of my life, and I talk to doctors and I talk to a lot of researchers. The average man in America today between the ages of 40 and 60 does not have a free testosterone over 8. Whew. They are walking around in a coma. They are brain dead, they are blind, they are depressed, and they want to take a nap by 2 o'clock almost every single day. And that is because they have literally almost no free circulating bioavailable testosterone in their body. What they do have, again, bound, which is the total number, is useless. So if a guy goes and he gets his test and it comes back that they're 480 or they're 520, and they don't even run their free testosterone, which is another joke in and of itself, which tells you nothing, and they tell the guy, go home, you're fine, you're in the middle of the range, you don't need testosterone. I mean, first off, A, you don't even know what his free testosterone is, which is all that matters. And B, the guy can have the worst symptoms ever. He could be depressed, brain fog, all the, hot buttons, and they're not being addressed. So again, it's very, very important if you're a man, or a woman and you're watching this podcast, that you understand that when you get your labs done, you have to have your free testosterone evaluated. And symptomology, so again, how do you feel, is much more important than the measurement numbers on a piece of paper. And a legit doctor who prescribes hormones is going to be able to prescribe for you if you have all the symptoms. And again, let's identify the symptoms. The number one symptom of a testosterone deficiency is brain fog. Mm-hmm. It's not sexual dysfunction. It's not low energy. It's literally a depressive mood and an inability to focus or concentrate by mid-afternoon. That's the number one symptom. The last symptom, and this is a lot of guys get really pissed off over this, is like inability to get an erection. Almost no times have I ever seen a person who had low testosterone, again, from a deficiency measurement standpoint, who couldn't get an erection. They always can still get an erection. So a lot of guys get pissed off and they're like, everything works fine down there, dude.
Yeah.
I don't need testosterone. I'm fine down there. Don't accuse me of that. They get all like personally offended. And it's like, dude, your sexual function and your erectile strength has nothing to do with whether or not you have a testosterone deficiency. So don't look at it from that perspective. Again, it's brain fog. It's, crushing like depression. It's like an inability to wake up in the morning in a good mood, like jumping out of bed, wanting to tackle the day. That's what testosterone deficiency is. And look, we've been talking mostly about men. This is also now a full-blown epidemic in women.
For ladies, yeah.
Too. All women that have had hysterectomies have been chemically castrated. And the majority of call them functional medicine doctors that are working with women are so clueless about this that they don't give women testosterone after hysterectomies because, again, they think it's going to cause cancer. It's insane. And they give them progesterone and estradiol, not knowing that without having a ovary or a uterus or both functioning, that cream, progesterone and estradiol that they're giving him it won't work. It can't work without a functioning ovary or uterus in the body. So it's so broken. I mean, obviously, I'm very passionate talking about this, but there are so many men and women who are aging, who are being completely disconnected from the medical system because the physicians that they are working with have no earthly idea what they're doing. None.
All right. Yeah, you're striking a chord here. I talk to, so in addition to this work, I also have another business that works just with men, right? And it's in the same age group, right? And in that group, almost universally, I hear when a guy goes, he has a hard time even getting a testosterone test. His doctor's like, what do you want that for? And so I'm coaching them. Well, here's what you tell them. I've lost my drive. I'm tired. I'm in a bad mood. And obviously you'd mentioned the whole sexual dysfunction thing. Look, guys, by the time that happens, just like Jay said, you're so far gone. That's red flag territory there. But yeah, it is very, very difficult, isn't it? What's a game plan for an andropause guy or a menopause woman then who's got a general practitioner they're telling them you're fine, you're in the reference range. Yeah. How do we get around that system? How do we, those of us that want to optimize, what do we do?
You cannot use insurance subrogated physicians for hormones. Yeah. You absolutely positively cannot. Now, I know that there are outliers and there are people out there. I have a private membership group with close to 750 people, much more women now than men because they're being more underserved than men are. But the reality is that there are some insurance doctors that will give you testosterone. But again, it's under 5%. Yeah. And here's why you don't want to do that anyway. Because they're going to now classify you as high risk for life insurance. And for other things. So you want to do this as strictly cash pay. Now, I know that some people are going to hear that and they're like, I pay my whole life, for my job and into my benefits plan. And I'm like, hey, you know what, man? Life is not fair. The system that we have in the United States is broken. And if you want to live the longest and strongest, you have to go outside of your system. And again, I always tell people, if you do an actual accounting of the expenses in your life month over month, annually, I guarantee you have money for hormone optimization. There's, lattes and beer and pizzas and shit that you're, wasting money on that you easily could spend on this. And look, I want to say this because sometimes I forget, and I've written about this in all my books on hormones, and I sometimes forget about talking about this on podcasts. You can't afford not to optimize your hormones because if you look at the math, if you have a myocardial infarction, right, which is what average 55-year-old Joe to 68-year-old Joe has in his life, I swear to God, this is statistical fact, and you guys can fact check me. If you go down that path and you just use your allopathic, insurance subrogation, here's my $40, $50, $60, $100 copay, and this is what I can afford. One heart attack is 68% likely to medically bankrupt you. 68%. of people in America who experience one event like that between 55 and 68, 68% of them face medical bankruptcy. So when you say you can't afford to pay $5,000 a year or $3,500 a year, whatever it is to optimize your hormones, you're full of shit, number one. And number two is you can't afford not to, because you're literally statistically looking at 68% likelihood of medical bankruptcy of having a major event. And again, a major event can be, again, a heart attack, a stroke, an embolism, a life flight, uneventful from an accident. So it's, again, the hormone optimization path is the guaranteed insurance program to live longest and strongest. And I'll also tell you this, and I think you know this, Kevin, and I'm sure a ton of people in your audience know this. If you're hormonally optimized, the likelihood that you get sick is so small. It's insane. My wife and I don't go to the doctor.
Right.
I'll be 55 on February 24th, and my wife turns 54 on November 26th, and we have not been to a doctor. We stopped going other than to get labs, right? Because we do our own labs, but we stopped going for all of their bullshit, allopathic, tests and nonsense and procedures, because we're all brainwashed to do it. We stopped doing it at 46. And I have never been healthier. My labs have never been better. I have low body fat. And again, I want to say this too. This is the most important thing I can say on this podcast. It is statistically proven the longer you will live equals the leaner you are. So the leaner you are as a person, the longer you will live. And why is that? Because inflammation is the primary killer of humans. Inflammation around the internal organs, which, as you know, Kevin, comes from visceral body fat. Visceral body fat is more inflammatory than kerosene. That is a fact. Think about that for a second. God made these amazing physical body avatars that we all house our spirit beings in. And why would the inflammatory fat tissue, visceral body fat, why would that be more inflammatory than kerosene, unless it was to teach us a lesson that you have this amazing body, don't take it for granted. So again, if you just live your life and keep body fat off, outside of being in a car accident or a train crash or a plane crash or shit like that you can't really control, you will statistically live longer than everyone. And again, dude, you've heard this saying before. Do you ever see fat people in senior citizen homes? No, because they die. Because the fatter you are, leads to disease. Right. It can be heart disease. It can be cancer. It can be diabetes. It can be, type 3, which is obviously neurological and neurodegenerative disease like Alzheimer's and Lou Gehrig's and dementia. But all of those things come from having too much visceral body fat as you get into your later years. So all you have to do to live into your 90s, 100s and beyond is to be lean.
Yeah, man, Jay, you are preaching, brother. I absolutely love it. I love that intentional use of the word lean. That's the one I use here all the time as well, yes. Because in that word, we're inferring muscle, we're inferring strength. We're not just not skinny, not smaller, not lose weight, right. To get rid of fat, build muscle. That's really what we want to do.
People freak out though, because when people like you and I say lean, they think, oh, you got to be jacked bodybuilder lean. And that's not what we mean. And the truth is, you said it earlier in the show, and I say this all the time too, lean is functionally strong.
Right on.
It means in your 60s and 70s and 80s, you can bend over and touch your toes. You can pick up your grandkids. Yep. You can hike a mountain. You can get on and off a train when you're traveling with your wife. Hopefully, if you're still blessed to be with your wife later in your life. I mean, it's just functional strength and wellness. It's not jacked six-pack bodybuilder. And I think a lot of people hear the word lean and they're like, oh, I'm not going to look like that. I can't look like that. No, you just got to be not fat. And you will be more muscular, hence by being lean, and that's how you live longer. And look, all these octogenarians, all these people living in the blue zones, again, they're not the greatest people to us to mimic or whatever, because obviously they don't do a lot. But if you measured anthropomorphically their body fat composition, I guarantee you that you would see that none of the women were over 18 to 20%, and none of the men were ever over 12 to 16%. Because again, they're sedentary, but they don't eat that much. And obviously they live in areas where there's no chemical,
all the toxins,
disasters in their food, right? So, I mean, you see a lot of people in Japan, that live into their early hundreds and stuff like that. Again, the blue zones. And what do? They just eat fish and white rice and they walk everywhere and stuff like that. But again, even those people are lean.
Yeah.
They're not inflamed. They do not have high levels of visceral body fat that cause disease. And again, every disease state in this country comes from inflammation. All these older people, that message me about, and I won't say they're older, they're like me and you, they're in their 50s, and they're like, I want to help my dad, or I want to help my mom. And the mom or dad is like in their late 70s or mid 80s or early 80s, and they've never done jack shit in their life. They've never exercised. They've never, been active. They've just been sedentary TV watchers. And it's like they want to give them, hormones and peptides and all this stuff. And I'm just like, you guys, you can't just all of a sudden like turn it around because you desire for your parents to live longer. They've done, what they've done in their life. Just love them for who they are. But you can't just turn something around at 80. That's why it's like so important. I'm not saying you can't build muscle at 80 because you can. I mean, there's obviously improvements, but I think a lot of people, they see all these amazing peptides and bioregulators and small molecules and everything that they think is a game changer. And they think they're just going to give them to their aging parent who's sedentary and, doesn't do jack shit, but watch TV and eat like shit. And they think that they're going to be magic bullets, and it's not like that. Like, again, the person has to change their lifestyle. And honestly, dude, like so many people in America today that have neurological or neurodegenerative disease, and let's just call it Alzheimer's, early onset, dementia, Lou Gehrig's, form of like epilepsy, again, autoimmune. It's because they've eaten the standard American diet for 40 plus years, and they have not been active. And all that is type 3 diabetes. Yeah. It's the same thing that people get when they have type 2 diabetes. It's the insulin chemoreceptors in the pancreas failing. The chemoreceptors are literally like a hinge on a screen-in door. And they only have so many times they can go back and forth from spiking insulin and dropping insulin and spiking insulin. And when you eat a standard American diet and you do not control insulin and you do this 30 to 40 years, hey, there's nothing you can do. You're going to end up with some form of neurodegenerative disease. It's just the way it is. And so it's like, I'm not labeling these people and saying, hey, there's nothing you can do for them. But again, if you're watching this podcast or you're listening to this podcast, the best thing that you can do right now is for yourself. And that is to control insulin production the way you eat, to live what I call insulin control, moderate your consumption of carbohydrates. And most importantly, exercise by building muscle and doing cardiovascular, because that is going to improve insulin sensitivity better than everything else. Sure, you can take drugs. Sure, you can take peptides. You can use metformin, dihydroberberin, all these great things, but it's your lifestyle that determines the length of your years and how functional you'll be in your 70s, 80s, and 90s.
There you go, folks. Yeah, no magic pill, no magic bullet, unfortunately, but it's all those, and it's almost like full circle here in this conversation. You start out by saying, hey, look, these quote unquote miracle peptides, they're amazing. This is a sea shift in pharmacology here. But if you're not taking, if you're not hormonally and metabolically optimized, it's not a magic pill, which is I'm afraid what the average American is looking for. All right. So just a couple of follow-up questions here before we kind of tie this up a little bit. Let's talk about the safety of, let's finish up on hormones first of all. So somebody who wants to optimize hormones, there's still, I think, this little bit of FUD out there about the safety of any kind of hormone replacement therapy. You want to address that very quickly?
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's a great question. And in the older, and again, not our generation, because we're Gen X, the boomer generation is still, for the most part, I think of my dad, he's turning 80 in November. We're having a big 80th birthday party for him, and he literally is like a maniac still. He won't slow down. He's got both of his hips replaced, both of his knees replaced. And every now and then, he has this big lake house. He lives in Atlanta, but he has a house in the mountains in Blue Ridge, Georgia. And dude, he goes up there at almost 80 and tries to, drive his hedgehog, all across his land, and he'll get off of his thing and pop his hip out, and he'll lay there and scream and have to call the ambulance and emergency services. So my family and my brothers and sisters are all dealing with him right now. But the truth is that generation of people think that hormones, for the most part, not all, but most, is illegal, unethical, immoral, and wrong. And so they won't do it. Thankfully, our generation is like, oh no,
Right.
We're just replacing or optimizing what is naturally getting less and less as we get older. So there's nothing wrong with it. It's like doing LASIK to your eyes. You know what I mean? So I think it's generational in how we perceive it. But there are two delivery systems of therapeutic testosterone that, if done right, and that's a huge caveat, almost have no side effects. And that is injection. And when I say injection, nowadays, the solutions that therapeutic testosterone can come in is very, very thin, permeous, oil-based, like an MCT oil or palmitic acid or even sesame oil, where it's so thin that it can go through a 30 or 29 gauge insulin needle. And that needle is so small that when you inject yourself, whether it's in your arm or your glute or your quad, or there's other areas you can inject, like in your lower belly and the subcutaneous area of your lower belly, there's no pain. There's absolutely no pain. All these people have hangups and phobias on using needles. And look, everybody has it initially. Your first couple of injections, you're like, oh my God, I've got to inject myself. But then once you do it, you're like, oh, it's nothing. So that's injection or delivery system number one. It's been around forever. As I always say with peptides and hormones, the biggest or highest impact delivery system is always going to be injectable, because you're going to cross the blood-brain barrier the fastest, and you're also going to get into portal or parental circulation the fastest. So you want to get it into your bloodstream the fastest, right? The second most effective, and after that I say I put the kibosh on almost everything because I just don't feel like there's anything as effective, is transdermal, which is obviously a cream that you would rub for men at the base of your scrotum. And the reason you put it at the base of your scrotum is because the scrotum is 8 times more permeous than any other skin location on the body. It's the same thing for women who use cream. The hood of the clitoris or the interlabial lips of the vagina are also just as permeable. So that's where you put it there. Now, a lot of women will put it still on their inner thighs, and some people will put it like down here. But again, those areas do not absorb as well as the other areas. So outside of creams, which again are transdermal and injectionable forms, I don't like anything else, because none of them are designed to what is known as cleave molecularly naturally, right? A lot of people use pellets. Pellets is a highly, highly ineffective delivery system because the human body does not like a pellet. It sees it as a foreign object. It reject it. On top of that, you have to have physicians doing invasive surgical procedures on you to cut you and put them in. They're horrific and medieval. I have literally a desktop file on my computer of pictures that people have sent me over the last 10 to 12 years of failed what are called pellet extrusions, and they are gnarly. And I tell people to not do that. It is absolutely retarded. The other thing about that is, by the way, it's the highest cost delivery system. So doctors love to give you pellets because they jack up the prices and make money off you, versus a simple delivery system in a vial, a multi-injection vial of testosterone and oil, or again, the cream is literally, like, no exaggeration, like 1/7 to 1/8 the cost. So those two delivery systems for both men and women are always going to be the best. And this is important, when you take therapeutic hormones, again, it doesn't matter if you're a male or female, the more often you administer your delivery system, whether it's injectable or cream, the more close you mimic the body's natural pulsatile diurnal release of testosterone. So in the human body, for men and women, we release testosterone between the hours of 4 a.m. and 6 a.m. naturally. So if we're injecting or applying daily or at least every other day, we're mimicking our body's natural production. And when we mimic our body's natural production, our body starts, as we get older especially, our body starts seeing that as our natural release. And so there's no what are called perturbations in the endocrine system. There's no imbalances. We don't have side effects. We don't get acne. We don't have mood swings. We don't have any of these things that are associated with an imbalance. And so you always want to administer, again, the frequency of your delivery system at a minimum of every other day. And if you're a totally anal, retentive, crazy person who likes to inject every single morning, a lot of people do, it's like brushing their teeth, then that's even best, because then that's going to be, mimicking the body's natural production on a daily basis. But it's not optimal in my opinion, because most people are not going to inject themselves every day forever. But it's very reasonable to be able to inject yourselves 3 times a week, or if you have the cream to apply, in the morning when you wake up post shower, it's very simple to do that. So those are your 2 primary delivery systems. Again, I didn't talk about progesterone or estradiol for women, because women, for the most part, as they're peri and postmenopause, are going to probably need those in addition to testosterone. But if you're a woman and you're watching this show and your doctor has you on progesterone and estradiol and not on testosterone, you need to fire them immediately and get another doctor who understands how to do this, because you need testosterone just as much as a man does.
Right on. All right. So lots of good information there. All right, Jay, thank you for that. Let's switch gears here a little bit. I want to go back to the peptides. So somebody's looking at, because let's face it, we've had hormone replacement therapy around for a while. How should somebody, as they're proceeding into peptide therapy, how should they navigate the safety features here? What do I need to be concerned of as I start to explore peptides for injury recovery, longevity, fat loss, muscle building, whatever it is?
I mean, it's a good question. I mean, realistically, are you doing everything else that we already talked about on this podcast?
So that's kind of
you working? Yep. Are you working to optimize your hormones? Because I always say this: if you are hormonally deficient, taking peptides is like throwing water into a Ferrari. You are not going to get the same effect as somebody who is hormonally optimized. Or, and people sometimes hear me say that and they're like, well, I'm not hormonally optimized. Like, why does it even matter? Then get hormonally optimized, or at least work to get hormonally optimized when you're going to use peptides. Because again, as signaling molecules, how are they going to be effective if the primary sump pump in the body, which is your hormones, is not functioning adequately? And again, when I say adequately, most people are deficient. So it's like, if you are deficient and you feel like dog shit and you start taking peptides, like, how do you expect them to work better than somebody who doesn't feel like dog shit and is, somewhat optimized or balanced hormonally? That's when you are really stacking the effects of peptides, because growth hormone agonist peptides like a testosterone, like an ipamorelin, like a CJC, they actually work synergistically with testosterone. So you're going to see a much more enhanced effect of muscle building, vitality, anti-aging, longevity, skin elasticity, deeper sleep. All of those things are going to be much more pronounced if you're hormonally optimized, again, using, for the most part, therapeutic testosterone, along with these growth hormone agonist peptides like Tessa, IPA, or CJC. So always understand, if you are, functioning with a hormone deficiency, try to right that ship. Get with a doctor who can prescribe you hormones, who again has a 10-year practice or more. There are plenty of them out there. You can find them online. You can follow me online, and you can find the doctors. My private membership community, we recommend the doctors to work with. Yeah. So anybody who joins my private membership community can't fail, because we're not going to give them we're never going to put you with a doctor who's going to screw you up. And most of them obviously will screw you up, but that's kind of the way to look. And then I would say, from like a side effect profile, the worst that people see when they start injecting peptides is, like, again, depending on the peptide, a little bit of nausea. And when I say nausea, it's like CJC 1295 produces a niacin effect. So people get a little flushed and they feel a little off for maybe 2 minutes, and that's it. The other side effects that people notice are like what are called cellulitis, like, an itchy, red, bumpy pattern from where you're injecting like subcutaneously. It's nothing noticeable. It's not like you feel pain there, during the course of the day, but you may notice a little bit of redness in the area because your body is, has a mild histamine response to the injection. I'm trying to think other effects. Obviously, we talked about GLPs. If you take too much of a GLP, which again, pharma loves you to do because they make money off you, you could have, some bowel issues. You could have a really bad issue of not eating because your body is like feeling nauseous because of the dosage is too high. But honestly, Kevin, like, again, using peptides for 22, 23 years, like that's it. There are some peptides, the melanin corticoid receptor pathway peptides like melanotan 1, which I take to tan, to enhance consciousness, to make me get into the zone when I meditate faster. Those peptides can cause a slight nausea feeling within, say, 10 minutes of injecting, but it goes away, and it's nothing that makes you, keel over or sick. Some of the other sexual inducing peptides like PT141 or oxytocin, some people can have a reaction to those. It's mostly in women, and the reaction is like they just feel like shit for 20 minutes and it goes away. But other than that, I just don't really know too many side effects. And very truthfully, if you start low and go slow and you always observe using a microdose, you'll never have any side effects.
All right. So, and that brings up another point then. If somebody were curious, peptide curious, wanting to, let's say they've got the foundation laid, right? There's somebody who's worked on their metabolism and built a little strength. They've gotten lean. I suppose what you really want is a mentor. You want somebody who's going to guide you through this, and it's not your doctor. Is that fair?
No. And you know what? You're the first person that gets this. So I'm not joking. So I have actually been working with a tech team and some very smart people to build a bot, a Jay Campbell bot. And it took 8 months to build, and I received it this morning. And so far, my wife and I have been asking it questions, attempting to stump it. And it's insane how good it is. And honestly, it's going to be available in my private community, hopefully within the next 2 weeks as we integrate it in. And it's literally, dude, $99 a month. And you can ask the bot until you're blue in the face and you will get answers. I mean, honestly, I'm not joking when I tell you this. I feel like it's answering better than me. So they scraped all my data, all my courses, all my books, everything I've ever put into the ecosystem of Earth that I know of. And it's absolutely incredible. Now, it cost me a lot of money to build this thing, but that's the best way to get information. Obviously, there are tons of influencers. There are tons of people that are online that are putting out information about peptides. I would just be very cautious because, as I always say, right now, the signal to noise ratio on this planet is mostly noise. The signal is very low. 20 years ago, when the internet was in its infancy and very smart people were out there sharing and collaborating and crowdsourcing the data, it was a different world. But now we have so much nonsense. Do you realize, and again, I don't pay attention to this, but people tell me this, but the average person who goes on to Reddit to get information about peptides is literally learning the opposite of the truth. That is how bad the information is. And also, unfortunately, you probably, if you use AI, and I attempt to refuse to use it. I do have my team that somewhat uses ChatGPT for stuff now, but I refuse to do it. But the AI now, Kevin, hallucinates.
Yep.
So when you get lots of bad information, which is again found on Reddit, found on X, found on IG, found on TikTok, found on, all these other crowdsourced places, it starts to actually regurgitate bunk.
Yep.
Like I am literally having people send me AI stuff
responses
on my stuff, and I read it and I'm like, this is abjectly, patently false. What is this? So we're in this really weird time right now where it's like you have to be very cautious where you get your information from. And I would not rely on ChatGPT or Grok to get information because, like I said, it's literally sourcing good with lots of bad.
100% with you there.
It's a mimic. It doesn't know how to discern what the good is with the bad. So make sure that where you get your information is from people that really walk the walk and talk the talk. And again, I'm not saying there isn't other great information out there because there is. It's just getting harder and harder to discern what is legit and what is flawed.
Right on. Going back to that signal to noise ratio, just in this health fitness space in general, that's a train wreck right now. It really is.
People have no idea where to get their information.
It's because they're going to ChatGPT is why. And and the problem is you just spelled that out very eloquently, right? It's not discerning the signal and noise. It's just looking at all this information, synthesizing it and regurgitating back some sort of an answer. Yeah. All right, Jay. Well, that brings me where I kind of wanted to end up here. I'm fascinated by technology. Do you see, and you're kind of out here on the forefront, maybe not so much with the AI, although I love the idea of a virtual Jay. Do you see a time when we've made this case several times now? Look, if peptides are fantastic, if you've got the foundations taken care of, do you see a day where that won't be the case, where technology can actually save us, where we can have maybe not optimal health, but quote unquote good health, thanks to technology, pharmacology only? In other words, I don't have to, I'm going to drink my Soylent Green and work on my computer like this all day, and somehow magically I'm going to be healthy. Or is that in our dystopian future, or not so much?
That's the greatest movie of all
right on.
time.
All right. Yeah, man.
I watched that movie. I've watched that movie like 7 or 8 times in my life. And you know, by the way, there's still bits and pieces in there that is like foreshadowing, I think, what is to come. What an absolutely profound film. Dude, that's an amazing question. I think it really just comes down to your perspective. I wrote an email the other day about the transhumanist world versus, the people like us that are still organic. And I think it just comes down to like, where do you desire to place your consciousness? Because humans have finite lifespans, right? Like energetically, spiritually, soul wise, we're permanent, eternal beings. I think we all kind of understand that depending on where you fall in your spiritual beliefs. But physically, these bodies are going to die. Now, obviously, the Peter Diamondises and the Brian Johnsons and the Ray Kurzweils of the world are going to tell you, no, bro, we're going to beam your consciousness into the cloud, and the cloud is going to replace your body, and you'll be able to keep your, consciousness going forever and just use makeshift and repair bodies. That's not me, dude. Like,
Right on.
I want to die. I want my soul or my spirit or my energy or whatever inhabits this avatar to go on to its next mission, to its next journey, into the afterlife or into my next lifetime or whatever, again, depending on your spiritual beliefs. I do not want my consciousness seated in the cloud, like these, again, call them transhumanists want to do. So I think the answer is organically, I believe, and again, it's my opinion, I believe that we can live to 150. I think, and when I say 150, I don't mean like a desiccated, decrepit, hunched over, the sarcopenia, old person, I mean like you and me now,
Yeah.
like we're robust and we're able to keep walking and all this stuff. So, I mean, I do think that life extending physical avatars is coming. I think that the technology is there. I think we're already on this path now. I mean, I look at myself as 54 and I'm not 54 by any stretch biologically, right? So, I mean, I think it just comes down to the question of like, how long can we live robustly in this current body? And again, I'm not the transhumanist where they're going to beam my consciousness into the cloud and, become a mechanized robotic being. I don't want that. I want to maintain my organic physical body. And maybe some people are okay with that. They do want to be beamed into the metaverse and live in the cloud or whatever, but that's not me. So I just think that personally, physically knowing what's coming, knowing that there'll be stage 4 and stage 5 agonist peptides, knowing that there's these amazing biomedical technologies, I do think that we'll probably be able to live to 150. Again, in these current physical bodies and still be robust and still, have our current strength and faculties and all of those things. I really do think that's coming. So, I mean, I would say that that's probably an extension of 50% of current life because, looking at it, I think the average person looks at 100 as the end. So if we could get to 150 being the end, that's a lot more life.
Sure is.
You know what I mean? And that would say, and honestly, that would make 75 be where you and I are right now.
Yeah.
And I absolutely 100%, I wouldn't even believe, I go by, I have a mentor, belief is the enemy of knowing. So it's like, if you know something in your heart because of your science and your awareness and the knowledge that you have studying and understanding it, I truly do know that we are going to live longer. Or some sect of us will live longer. And I think it's people like us now. I think it's people in their 40s, 50s, and 60s who are learning about these technologies, who are understanding how to do, combine diet, lifestyle, supplementation, sleep, EMF mitigation, all of those things combined with these wondrous technologies like GLPs, like these small molecule, age regression, biological age regressing products. I do think that we can extend our life again in our physical bodies by 50 years. I really do think that.
Man, I absolutely love it. I'm with you. I'm very optimistic about the future here of mankind. I think it starts with us, right? With
It does.
personal responsibility.
I think we could blow ourselves up. I do think we could blow ourselves up. I think we have blown ourselves up. I think we're on the precipice.
We are
right
on
now
the precipice, aren't we?
choosing-
Yeah.
Right. We're choosing whether or not we do blow ourselves up. And look, I don't think this is out of the realm of possibility. I think that there could be two parallel divergent species. I think that some of us could go the transhumanist route and get beamed into the cloud and live into the, call them the 15-minute cities. And a lot of us will literally go to like farms or, I call them conscious communes.
All right.
Conscious communities, conscious communes where we're like all living, together. And, we have the human wave energy fields of like connection, and we've decoupled from the big tech nonsense. And I think that we could still maintain a sense of technology and advanced, wonderful, biomedical stuff and just live detached from, the network. And so I can see two divergent species of humans going each separate direction. And I think that would be fine. I mean, again, if we could live in harmony with one another, again, if that does happen, I would say the major cities will be the hubs of transhumanism, and the countrysides and the mountain communities, and again, call these conscious communes or conscious communities, will be outside of the major cities. That's kind of how I see. I just had this guy email me last night. I'll just read this to you real quick, but this is fascinating. I have no idea who this guy is, but he messaged me last night and he said, "Hey man, this is going to sound crazy, but I really need you to talk to me." His name is Dirk. And he says, he's like, "I'm literally creating a utopia of people that want to live in conscious communities." He's like, "You don't know me, but I know you from your podcast and from your media appearances." And he's like, "You really need to talk to me." So I know that there are people out there right now, Kevin, who are building infrastructures exactly like what you and I just talked about.
Sign me up for the conscious community, man. Yeah, there you go. Absolutely love it. All right, Jay. Well, as we're wrapping up here, man, we covered a lot here today. Somebody who is interested in any of this, right, wants to get in touch with you, maybe he's interested in your program, your mentoring, all that good stuff, where are we going to send them?
The best place is, so for everybody, and by the way, thank you so much for having me on this podcast. This has been one of my favorite ones of all in 2025. You ask great questions. You're brother. Very smart. I want to get your cell phone number before we hang up after the show's over so we can connect and communicate further. But I do have a domain. It's jcampbell.com/free-info. And on that page, every book that I've ever written is available for free as a downloadable PDF. I also have a ton of free, call them lead magnets or Chotskys. I've got like the peptide cheat sheet, the bioregulator stacking guide, the 10 mistakes, to never make before when you start peptides. And then one that was really relevant to the show is the 10 questions to ask your doctor before starting hormone optimization. So like that document right there has saved thousands of people from being scammed over by docs that don't know how to do it. Because if they can't answer the 10 questions, you got to find a different doctor.
Yeah.
So all that stuff is available for free on that page. And then, of course, on social media, I'm Jay Campbell 333, which is 333 is the angel number, the connection between master teachers and the students, because I like to consider myself a student of everyone. So that's the best way. But again, dude, it was an honor. Oh, I should say also, I do have a company for research peptides. I always forget, but BioLongevity.com. Use the code, and I'm happy to make you an influencer or an affiliate, and you can have a code. But right now, just use the code JAYC. And you will always get 15% off any product that you purchase.
Fantastic, brother. All right. Well, guys, I'm going to put everything that Jay just mentioned into this show notes. You guys can find that whatever app you're watching this on, of course, on our website. Jay, I want to thank you so much, man, for coming on the show, sharing your knowledge and your wisdom and your thoughts in this space, but really for the passion and the work that you're doing, man. I absolutely love it. Encourage you to keep up the great work.
Thank you, Kevin. It was an honor to be here, and I received that and reflect that back to you, and let me know how I can help you in any way.
Right on. Okay, men, that's our show for this week. Don't forget to download our free guide titled How to Raise Your Testosterone Naturally. You can find the download link in the show notes for this episode on whatever app you're listening to this podcast on. If you've enjoyed today's show, here are 3 ways you can support us. Number 1, share this episode with a friend. Number 2, make sure to like and follow this show, and please consider leaving us a 5-star review. Number 3, give us a follow over at Instagram. We're at Alpha Edge Army. So that's Alpha Edge Army all run together. I really appreciate you men taking the time to listen, and until next week, stay strong.